mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with bank robberies. There's a lot of stuff going on, with violent crime. Why did this particular squad interest you so much?
It was the time, it was a time, I guess, in history, that DC, when I say DC was out of control, the crack epidemic hit like between 86 and 87. I think, actually because of Murph and DEA's activities down in Colombia, there was in the early 80s, actually cocaine use in the U.S. was going down, and there was a high supply, lower demand. The introduction of crack, I mean, I think that's a fascinating story in and of itself, other than the false narratives are out there that the CIA or the U.S. government, it's a bunch of BS.
Welcome to Game of Crimes. Hola, amigos, players, playerettes, dudettes, and everybody, regardless of where you fall into that spectrum. Welcome back. This is Game of Crimes. I am Morgan Wright, the guy with the hair, the guy with the Tommy Bahama, here literally with my partner in crime, the free T-shirt man.
Murph. Hey, everybody. Welcome back.
You actually paid for the shirt you're wearing today. I'm proud of you.
I did. It's the West Virginia shirt. On the back of it, it says Mountaineers. See there?
I thought it said Go Ears.
No, that's your cheer when you're in the ball game.
Oh, Go Ears. Yeah.
How about them ears?
Oh my God. I don't even want. Oh, anyway, welcome back. I don't know where to go.
It's not EARS. It's EERS.
Well, that's because you guys don't know how to spell. Yeah.
Well, apparently you don't know how to spell Mountaineers.
Well, if it's ears, it's EARS. But anyway, I digress. There's your first drinking game. All right, welcome back, guys, to Game of Crimes. Thank you for joining us. The script says I'm supposed to do housekeeping, so that's what we shall do real quick.
All right.
Go over to Apple, Spotify, hit those 5 stars, 5 stars. It helps us out a lot. And guys, we've really seen some traction, so we really appreciate everything that you're doing for us on that. Also, head on over to our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com. We have a couple guests coming up. One of them, it's going to take a whole nother page to list all his books. We just did that episode yesterday.
Oh,
but if you're into understanding about serial killers and how to hunt serial killers using some very modern technology, that's going to be for you. But anyway, that'll be over there, our mailing list, our merch. Also, follow us on this thing they call the social media, at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook, and the Instagram. But Murph, I can say this 3 times real fast. Where you got to be.
Beetlejuice. Hey, come on over to Patreon and check us out there. I mean, you hear us say this every week when we come on, but we're serious. I mean, there's some fantastic content on there. There's some serious stuff. There's a lot of funny stuff. We've got You Can't Make This Shit Up, 911, What's Your Emergency? I'm just shocked at all the stuff we do. And we do a monthly Q&A where you can ask us the questions. And we have yet to turn down a single question. So it's a lot of fun. There's some serious questions in there, but we'll give you our honest opinions about things. And as you know, if people ask us about dirty cops, we'll be the first to tell you nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop.
We'll toss them under the jail for you. By the way, too, as we're recording this, it is the 25th of August in the year of our Lord 2022, Kyrie Domine Donis Requiem, and episode 4 of The Real DEA Narcos, talking about the Real DEA Narcos Cali edition, just came out. And I'm telling you, episode 4, shit starts getting real. You got to go over there and see what Chris Feistel, Dave Mitchell do, because I'm telling you, not only is it fun, but just Chris's encyclopedic knowledge of everything. And then Dave's just good old boy. Hey, wait till you hear the stories about how they used the threat of bringing in the 82nd Airborne to put...
Hey, do what you got to do.
Yeah, what a great story. But hey, guys, you got to go over there, like you said, and we've got some more good stuff coming out. So that is patreon.com/Game of Crimes. Also, if you just want to do a pause for the cause, go over to paypal.com, use our email, gameofcrimespodcast@gmail.com, or paypal.me/gameofcrimes, whatever it makes it easier for you to support the show. And we want to bring you more exciting content, invest in more equipment. And actually, this would help us invest in a couple trips. We're still working on a very big one. We hope to hear something back on that. If so, we shall be flying across the United States to go to the West Coast to do something to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Well, and actually,
that's what I said right before my colonoscopy.
Well, if we pull this one off, it will be. This is going to be a coup if we can pull it off.
So we shall find that out. But anyway, folks, as you probably have figured out already, this is a show about crime. We talk about bad people doing bad things and bad people doing bad things to good people. We take these stories seriously, but
you're going to see we never take ourselves seriously. We're going to have a lot of fun on the show.
So if we're going to have fun, we got to get through according to the script. I have to ask you, Murph, what time is it?
I'll bet it's time for
Small Town Police Blotter. And guess what? We have something. This is, I don't want to say this is a watershed moment, but this is pretty cool. All three stories came to us courtesy from the Game of Crimes fan group, I should say, run by our favorite mafia queen, Sara Di Salvato. So all three stories today came from folks that posted it on the fan page, on the fan group, I should say.
Yeah, this is on Facebook, everybody.
This is on Facebook. So you guys got to go to Game of Crimes fans. Just look for that. It's a group. It's not the page. We have a public page, but this is a group run. You got to answer a couple easy questions. You'll get in, and when you get in, you're going to hear stories like this, Steve.
I think I've heard this one. My wife might have told me about this one.
Well, you don't even know which one it is yet.
Yeah, but I haven't read it, but I got a feeling I know what's coming.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. The first two stories are Florida, so I'll give you that one. Right. It is not unusual, right, for police to chase somebody, right? I mean, we do it all the time, right? This happened down in Oskaloosa County, Florida. So according to the Oskaloosa County Sheriff's Office, how'd you like to say that when you're trying to do a raid? Knock, knock, knock. Oskaloosa County, God damn it. Sheriff's Office. All right.
Police.
According to the Sheriff's Office, Dustin Mobley had previously fled deputies in Holt back on January 3rd by diving into a swamp along the Yellow River after he was confronted about a $40,000 stolen boat. They say the sheriff's officers say Mobley was on the boat when deputies arrived, and then he dove off to avoid going to jail. What he did, Steve, he used heavy machinery cutting a hole in a metal building to steal the vessel from a business off of Highway 4 in Baker back in January. But now, during this chase, here's the question. How would police be able to successfully tase Mobley as he's making his getaway? How would they tase him if they're in pursuit?
Shoot the water.
No, he was riding a lawnmower. That's how you can tase somebody who's in pursuit. You just walk up and go, dude, get off the... No, okay.
I thought he dove in the water.
No, that's what caused them to come after him the second time. So his first offense was stealing the boat, diving in the water, but then when they went to go arrest him for that, he tried to escape them on a lawnmower. He got tased, and according to them, this is going to shock you, Steve, he had a revolver, a handcuff key in his possession, and a meth pipe.
Well, Dustin, he's ready. I mean, he's going to party.
What do we say, kids? Don't do meth. This is why. All right. So that one.
I hope they got him, riding the lightning bolt there on video. You got to watch those. It's fun.
Well,
trying to get away on a lawnmower, you can run. You don't need a car. You can run along the lawnmower and zap the guy.
So Bill Turpin, that one came from Bill Turpin. So Bill Turpin, thank you. This next one comes to us from Carolina Nunez Pacheco. I can't even talk this morning. Carolina Nunez Pacheco. So another Florida person. This time it's a Florida woman. Guess what? A Florida woman is accused of causing a disturbance in a grocery store parking lot while wielding a pitchfork and a whip during a rainstorm.
Yeah, we're going to have some fun tonight, honey.
Lisa Ann Sloan, 56, of Ocoee, O-C-O-E-E?
O-C-O-E. Okay.
Something like that. Yeah, wherever she's from, was arrested Tuesday, charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon without intent to kill. Dash cam video from a Florida Highway Patrol trooper shows Stone in the parking lot of a Publix in Claymont around 2:12 p.m. She can be seen pointing her whip at the patrol car before walking away. She shortly walked back to the parking lot, pointed her pitchfork at the trooper, and then, according to the FHP trooper, who disarmed Stone, she refused to be handcuffed after taking her to the ground. She was placed into the cruiser. The trooper said while he spoke with the manager, who Sloan was attempting to sell teddy bears to behind the store, she then ran around the parking lot and stabbed a minivan in the parking lot, which the pitchfork. According to the dash cam, she tells the trooper, God is great, God is in control. Afterwards, she was able to unbuckle her seatbelt, kicked at the right door window of the cruiser, and that she appeared to be highly intoxicated on some sort of stimulant drug, but did not appear to be under the influence of alcohol. I would guess it was meth.
So I wonder how she, when she pointed that whip at the trooper when he first got there, was that seductively like, "Hey, big boy, look what I got for you"? And then, you know what? I guess you can't. If she attacked you with a pitchfork, I mean, you've got all the authority in the world right there to take her out with your weapon.
She just pointed the pitchfork at him, but it's kind of hard to take. I mean, you got to take this stuff seriously.
She stabbed that minivan, but you can't shoot somebody for stabbing a minivan. So,
well, I don't know. If you stab my vehicle, that could be close to my new Kia.
And hats off to the Florida trooper for just doing your job and not getting stuck.
And that's one of those things when you go to a conference and everybody goes, "No shit, there I was, facing down a lady armed with a pitchfork."
What's the lady that has the seductive outfit?
Elvira,
yeah. Maybe that's the new age Elvira.
Hey, look, if it was Elvira, I would have said, "Okay, come on, bring it on." All right. Anyway, we move on. Dominique Balsoma. Now, she works, she sends us some good stuff. She works up in Maryland. And so there's this little website, and they listen to the scanner and they kind of report out. So this is something that was reported out not too long ago, Steve. This happened in Salisbury, Maryland.
Oh.
So Salisbury, Maryland, responding to Tamarack Drive in reference to a drug dealer at a residence to collect money from a user. Well, there you go. That's the reason to call 911. The caller stated they have owed the drug dealer money for a few months, and the drug dealer is now at the residence to collect. No shock there. Update, 6:40 p.m. The caller has called back and stated the dealer is now attempting to break into his residence. Update, 7:04 p.m. The story continues to grow as we continue to shake our heads. The caller advised police that he was kidnapped earlier by the dealer, and now the dealer has stolen his vehicle. So, for those of you scratching their heads, this is not a joke. They didn't make this up. This is really happening right now. So,
was there no law enforcement response from the first couple calls?
Well, that's a good question. Apparently not. I mean, somebody's stupid enough to call in and say, "Hey, look, I haven't paid a drug dealer. I owe him money, and now he's stealing my car." The other thing, too, is, hey, they could be tied up with somebody armed with a pitchfork and a whip.
10-100, no units available. Sorry. We'll get to you when we can.
Calls are backing up anyway. So hey, there we go, guys. Thank you, guys. This is from our Game of Crimes fan group.
Mm-hmm.
And so just go search that. Sandy Salvato will grant you admission if you can just even barely answer a couple questions, just even get in the ballpark. Just take a good old college try.
Hey, she let me in. I mean, if I'm in there, everybody should be able to get in.
Damn Skippy. I remember when I first joined the group, I was saying something. She goes, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm one of the podcast hosts." She goes, "Oh."
Hey, that woman's not afraid. She's going to whip your ass.
That's right. All right. Well, hey, speaking of, I don't know how to transition into this one, but this next guy, you actually were able to find for us. And this one, I'm telling you, this story, this will be a longer episode, even though it's a two-parter. This story is one of the most compelling stories I've heard. And the guy, John Kuchta, it's not Kuchta or Kuchta, but Kuchta. I mean, Steve, just I don't know what to say other than his way he was able to articulate it, the stuff he went through. But you could tell this affected him.
Yeah, and shout out to Jaime Camacho, retired DEA agent in South Florida, for making this introduction. And I talked to John some time ago, and I'm getting old and forgetful, and so Jaime called me again and said, "Hey, give this guy a call." John is a retired FBI agent. And you may remember this. Back in the early 1990s, a gunman went into the Washington, D.C. police headquarters and shot and killed several police officers. It was one sergeant with D.C. Metro Police and 2 FBI agents. And then a third FBI agent was shot but survived. That's John Kuchta. I don't want to get too far in the story because you're going to hear his story. I mean, you're going to hear some emotion in this story. You're going to hear how proud we are of his actions and our sympathies towards him for what he had to go through. But John got shot in the heart. He's the first person I've ever heard of that got shot in the heart and survived. His story's compelling. He hasn't let him get him down. He continued on as a successful FBI agent for the rest of his career. He's now doing some private industry work. Turns out we're probably within an hour of each other. So we're eventually here going to get to meet in person and share a cup of coffee. But today is a story about heroism. And another individual who didn't let his circumstances get him down. Just so proud of what you're getting ready to hear today.
Yeah, so this happened November 22nd, 1994, and we dedicate this episode in memory of the three folks who died: Sergeant Hank Daly, 51, of the Washington Metropolitan Police Department, and FBI Special Agents Michael Miller and Martha Dixon Martinez. So you're going to hear a great story. And so, Murph, I got to ask you one question, though, if we want to hear the story. And this truly is one of the biggest, baddest, most dangerous games of all. I mean, if this doesn't tell you about how dangerous it can be to do this work, nothing else will. So are you ready to play that most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes?
Hey, everyone, truly get in, sit down, shut up, and hold on. This is a story. Bring on John.
Is on. Forget my clicks, man. You know, I can't see without him. You know what I mean? But
I'm not going to edit this part out, Murph. I'm sorry. He's got a pair of pull-apart glasses, magnetic at the front, trying to wear a head thing, and he's trying to figure out, how do I put this? By the way, as you can tell,
I'm used to taking them on off all day, man.
John Kuchta.
Yes.
Is actually a former FBI agent. That's why he needs so much help from us.
Welcome to the show, John.
Good to be here, gentlemen.
I was looking as we were preparing. He needed to go get something to drink, and I think instead of coffee, he came back with a Bloody Mary.
It's Florida. And he was wearing a good shirt, too. And he's like, well, screw this. Since we're not recording video, I'm taking off my shirt. So he's back to his thong and white T-shirt. And he's ready to go to the beach.
There you go. That's a sight you do not want to see, gentlemen.
Well, let's officially welcome him, because some people, you had a quick story about this, but some people look at your name and they'll think it sounds like Kuchta, but it's Kuchta. Did I pronounce that right? Kuchta?
Yeah.
You had a quick story behind that, John?
No, it's just Slovak. I mean, it's pretty much my entire life, you know, it's pretty much been butchered, you know, and every time we move to a city, we'd do like a family vote. Hey, should we start saying it phonetically, like Kuchta or Kuchta or whatever? And, you know, the kids, everybody all voted, no, we're Kufta, so we're going to stick with it. But that's what my dad said, how it was pronounced. And, you know, he's second generation in this country. And I went on, we did our last 4 or 5 years in the U.S. Embassy in London. It was one of my last postings, but went over. Yeah, nice, man. And we went over to Bratislava, and I pulled out my Florida driver's license, and I showed the tour guide that was taking us like on a walking tour Bratislava, and I'm like, how do you say my name? And she's like, oh, it's Kuchta, you know. So I'm like, okay, I guess we've been saying it right all these years.
My people,
they say it right. How a CH is an F, or like Kuchta or something, you know.
Back in the day when I was a Salina, Kansas PD cop, we had a guy named Harvey Kuchka.
Yeah.
Kuchka, and I think he pronounced it differently. But after a while, I was like, "You're a bunch of Kansas farm boys. Sorry, dude, your name's Kuchka." So that's what we're going to say. So
it's anglicized over the years.
Well, first of all, welcome. You folks will find out his story, but it's an amazing story. But before we get started, as we do with everybody, this thing of ours, how did you get started in this thing of ours we called law enforcement? What the hell possessed you to leave the cushy life of being at the embassy in London and living the life of a diplomat, family, and join law enforcement?
Oh no, that was at the very end of my career as an FBI assignment. But
okay. Well,
yeah. No,
so you didn't have a cush assignment. Okay.
Yeah, I was an ALAT at towards the very end. I was the ALAT in London.
Okay. We also have another rule, John. No acronyms. You use something you have to define.
Assistant legal attaché for the criminal programs out there. So I was like the criminal attaché to British police, Scotland Yard, and it was a good time. It was a good experience.
In fact, we had a very good friend, common friend, DEA agent Kurt. Kurt.
Yeah, we worked a lot together.
Yeah, actually, one of our episodes we had, or two of my friends that were detective constables on the counterterrorism command at New Scotland Yard. We did the whole episode around the London train bombing that they worked. So, great folks over there. Alan Thomas, Graham Burridge, both officially retired after their official retirement. So, congrats. But anyway, I digress. Let's get back to regularly scheduled podcast for our drinking game. That's digression number one.
So I started out. Yep. So I started. I guess I saw too many cop shows as a kid. I always wanted to be in law enforcement my entire life.
Did you watch Miami Vice?
Yes, but that was like, I was probably like, that was like probably college years, right? You know. Actually, we wouldn't go out to the clubs until, Miami Vice was over. That was like kind of where you'd sit around and drink a case of beer with your buddies, and then you go out because you didn't want to pay for drinks at the club,
Do you guys remember Hill Street Blues?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I love that show. That's one of the
Let's
best
roll,
shows I ever
but let's
saw.
be careful.
Yeah, let's be careful out there.
Exactly. Yeah, Hawaii Five-0. I mean, all that. That's what I grew up on, a steady diet of that stuff. And, as a kid, and I always was involved in law enforcement. No law enforcement family. Good friend, his dad was a county police lieutenant. And, he's kind of like the guy I was looked up to in the neighborhood. I never was involved in firearms or anything like that. Wasn't from a hunting family, nothing like that. So, I mean, actually the first time I really, other than when Mr. McGrath down the street took us out once when we were kids to the range, one time, I mean, I never, had a firearm, never carried a gun, anything. So my family background, I was the first generation to go to college. My dad, got a GED, was in the Navy, a corpsman in the Navy during World War II, never finished high school. And my thing was, personally, I wanted to reach the highest education level I could. And I wanted to be in law enforcement. And I looked at the FBI as, the premier law enforcement agency. And, so that's, kind of swung for the fences on that. And I went to law school because I went to night law school. I churned it out working full time during the day and went to law school at night. And I went to law school mainly because I wanted to be an FBI agent at the end of it.
Well, hold on. Don't gloss over that too much. What were you working at during the day full time and going to law school at night? What were you doing?
So after I worked at automatic data processing, and although that's a payroll company, they had a service where they did unemployment hearing compensation cases. Like in Pennsylvania, you didn't have to be an attorney to represent employers at these unemployment hearings. So you used the role of they were administrative hearings in front of an administrative judge. You used the role of evidence. You raised objections. You wrote briefs and you wrote appeals to the board of review. But I'd go all over the tri-state area, Ohio, West Virginia had to be an attorney, but Ohio and Pennsylvania and throughout, Western Pennsylvania, all the way up to Erie, PA, and hours away. And I'd try unemployment cases, for willful misconduct. If somebody, was terminated for, some type of cause, theft or, sleeping on the job or whatever, so you'd have to bring in witnesses and, take testimony and cross-examine. So
you were basically a trial lawyer.
Yeah, for in law school. Yeah. So I did that. And then I went to Travelers Insurance Company in their legal department. And finally, the federal public defender my last year as an investigator.
Hold on, John.
Yeah.
I got to call time. You are glossing. You're just
okay, sorry.
No, this is good. You're glossing.
We'll have some fun with this.
Yeah, we got to roll
down.
Just
I can. Yeah. If you want me to slow it down, that's fine. I got all time for you guys.
We want to roll back to college. Where'd you go to college at?
Yeah.
University of Pittsburgh. Yeah, I grew up, born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to University of Pittsburgh. Then after graduating from Pitt, I got a job working full-time, ADP. And then I went to law school at night at Duquesne University School of Law.
I've got to just insert one thing right here. I have to apologize to all the West Virginia Mountaineer fans that we're having a Pitt grad here on the show. Beat Pitt. That's all I can say. That's what our shirts say. And so coming up football season this year, the first game of the year is West Virginia versus Pitt. And how many years?
I'm so glad
10
that
years?
rivalry's back, man.
I know it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So
I went there once in my career, and I said never in my college career, and I said never go back to West Virginia for a football game.
So the reason I asked that is right when we got started, we're setting things up, and you're setting it up. You brought your towel out to put beneath.
Yes.
Your laptop. And what kind of towel was that?
That was a terrible towel for the Pittsburgh Steelers, my terrible towel.
So if anybody wondered if he's committed to Pitt or Pittsburgh.
Still Pittsburgh through and through, even though I haven't lived there for many, many years.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to get at. So, but what did you major in college?
Poli-sci, and then there was a minor in legal studies. So it's political science. What do you do with a political science degree? But go to law school. But there was two ways into the FBI, and it was there was two sure ways to get in. It's a lot different
now. An accountant or a lawyer?
accountant or lawyer, and I couldn't do math. So I went to law school. I mean,
How many
that's the
fingers am I
reality.
holding up here, John?
Nine.
That's a trick question. There's only 4 fingers, or there's 8 fingers and 2 opposable thumbs, technically. So
There you go.
trick that. But while you're going through college, when you went to college, was that your goal? When you went to college, I'm joining the FBI. Was that your?
It was law enforcement. I probably would. At the time, I came out. Okay. So when I went to college, it's the early '80s. The mills are shutting down. Pittsburgh is dying back then. It was a manufacturing base. People are getting laid off, and I wanted to be a detective. I wanted to be a Pittsburgh city detective. I think probably where I was reaching for is being a homicide detective, because that would be like the thing to be. And then and there's a time period like when the war on drugs came, like crack hits a street in '86. I'm in law school. I started thinking, hey, DEA is where to go, honestly. And then I met my wife in law school, and she's like, you're not going to DEA. So that was a short-lived dream,
Why, she didn't like DEA, or she just didn't want to move or be around dope, or what was it?
Funny, but she thought DEA was way too dangerous, so go
she's
figure,
establishing
right?
her dominance in this relationship immediately. You got to admire that lady.
So it was easy to get. I mean, it was really hard to get into a police department back then. The cities were, the tax base was leaving, and it was, I took a bunch of tests when I got out, and then I couldn't land anything. So if you didn't have a veteran preference or whatever, you weren't getting hard. So so I went to law school. Said, hey, I talked to a recruiter after, when I graduated, and there's actually, I thought it was probably some of the best advice they gave me, and it actually goes to like why the FBI is so different now, I think, but from when I joined. But it was with the CIA. And, I spent probably an hour interview with the CIA, and he's like, look, John, we can hire you, right? And, we can put you down in Washington, and you'd probably be, successful, working for us, probably starting in an analytical role. And then, but he's like, you're not an intel guy. You're law enforcement. He's like, go for the bureau. He was, and that really ended up being the best piece of advice, because I think there's definitely a difference between how the intel, I mean, I know that, working overseas and working in law enforcement all these years, but intel thinks differently, intelligence gathering and works a lot differently than
that was just a nice way of saying, look, we need intelligent people in Tintel. We need brawn over in the enforcement side. And it's the same way with us. The intel folks are the smart ones, right?
Yeah. No, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think we had, I think, that's probably what's lacking now, is this focus on intel, but that'd be a whole nother book maybe, or program.
Well, actually, put a pin in that. I want to have that discussion afterwards, after we go through all of this, because I agree with you. I think there's some things that have changed, but your wife, but your wife overruled you. No DEA. You talked to the CIA recruiter. Did you talk with him simply because you were just, playing the field?
Yeah, I was playing the field, and most people most people like you talk to today on the street, they think FBI and the CIA are the same. They don't know the difference. They don't understand the difference in missions, and just like that, I'm coming out of college, and I thought, okay, CIA, it's a federal agency, and I went in there, and certainly I studied it, but he pretty much was in tune enough to realize my personality and my skill set, and he's like, you're really not an intel guy, like he said, you have the aptitude and stuff, but really you're more law enforcement. And I think that was really where I was at. I didn't meet my wife till law school, but and then at that point, like I said, the war on drugs was raging, and I started to kind of, hey, maybe DEA, and we weren't married until graduated, but we're certainly dating during that time. And
was she going to law school as well?
Yeah. She was, we met in law school, and then whirlwind romance, and then married, and then, 1990
you
till
better get this right.
Yeah, I know, right? 32 years later, right?
Hey, and this is appropriate because
kids.
She didn't want you to go into DEA because she thought it was too dangerous. And for our listeners, just keep that in mind as John continues to tell his story. It's going to play a big role.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, she's one of the reasons, I mean, the prayers of a nation, but I mean, actually I have, her blood transfusions, kept me alive too, because she's the universal donor, but we'll get into that later. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I don't want to get ahead of the story here, but I love what you just said. That's fantastic.
So again, we're gonna put that in context because that's going to be very important later. But when you're going through law school, that's kind of challenging too, because if you join the bureau, you're going to have to move, which
Yep.
means if you're married, she's going to have to move. How did that discussion go?
Well, so here, and again, you talk about the sacrifices, and I look, guys, to many husbands out there, I didn't appreciate, all the sacrifices that my wife made. I mean, she was certainly the smarter of the two of us, right? She was on partnership track at a big law firm. She graduated before me, gets in with a big law firm in Pittsburgh. Then I, go into the FBI. She supports me. She's actually out there, she's probably in better shape than me too after law school. I mean, she's out there getting me running and, getting in shape. And I remember like when we used to train up out in, there was North Park is where the Pittsburgh field office did the new agent applicant test, and, some rolling hills and things like that. So for the 2-mile run, that's where, she took me out there, and she's like out there, pumping me up while I'm doing it, practicing and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I mean, she was always supportive. We got our first office. She had a transfer to the Washington field office, going through
Hold
life.
on.
Yeah.
We are glossing through stuff fast, dude. I know you
He's trying to hide something here, Morgan. He's hiding
tried that.
something.
No.
We are trained criminal investigators. We're going to drill down. So
yeah.
let's talk about applying for the FBI. So how long of a process did that take for you from the time you applied till the time you were hired?
It was let's see, I graduated law school in 90. When night school is a 4-year program. But you're still going full time at night. You still maintain 12 credits, and it's a brutal. I mean, it's a brutal road to hoe. But so I graduated in 90, and then I got in 91-11, which was August of I graduated from the academy August of 11. I'm sorry, August of 1991. So. When I applied, I applied right after I graduated law school, which would have been, the spring, like June, I guess, of 1990. And then it took me until April of 91 till I was into the.
Was the minimum age 25 back then to join?
Yeah, but I was 20, I was 27 at that point. And then I also was, I think, and if you had a law degree or an accountant, there was a waiver on that if you were an accountant or a lawyer.
Yeah, especially if you spent 4 years in law school, that kind of shows persistence, man.
Yeah,
going at 9.
It is.
Yeah. So I mean, that she's definitely the best thing that came out of law school. And
so, what area of law did you focus on?
I mean, it was really, I went to Duquesne. The beauty of Duquesne Law School is at the time, and I still think that's still the case, that the majority of state judges in the state of Pennsylvania come out of Duquesne University. And it's kind of like we called it the proletariat law school. It was a night school. They had a day program, but, it was a night school. Most of your lawyers in Western Pennsylvania come out of Duquesne, and there's everybody has this Duquesne ring, which I don't have on today, but, and everybody, growing up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, like everybody I knew that made it, like had this really cool Duquesne ring on, you know what I mean? And I always wanted the Duquesne ring. So as a kid, and, that's kind of where I shot for. But I always was interested in criminal. I mean, if I didn't get into the bureau, I would have, tried to be a prosecutor. I was working at the Travelers Insurance Company in their legal department during law school. I was doing workers' comp and stuff like that. But then I actually had a job offer with a federal public defender right out of law school. So I was working there my last year as an investigator full time. And then, that's another story. So while I'm with the federal public defenders, we're in a trial up in Erie, PA. And I see this postal inspector testify, and he's crisp white shirt and tie, and he's just so professional. It was a mob case, a gambling case, and just like, wow, this guy is so so incredibly professional, and how he holds himself, and it's like, I want to be that guy. It's like, I didn't want to necessarily be the lawyer, but I wanted to be, I wanted to be that guy. I mean, the guy that's actually making the case and putting cases together, solving crimes, and bringing people to justice. So that's pretty much, where I went with it. But I had a good exposure, during law school, certainly to federal. It was a pretty big deal. I think, but I just, the thing that swung me why I didn't go, I ended up clerking for a state appellate court judge, the late Honorable Judge Tamilia. Awesome guy, man. I mean, he was like a father to all his law clerks. I mean, this guy, he taught family law at Duquesne in the night program, and then he's a judge, and then myself and another classmate, we came on as law clerks for him. But I went to work with him as opposed to being a trial attorney with the federal public defender, because and I'm not saying, and I have all the respect in the world for defense attorneys, and actually through my FBI career, the person I wanted to impress was the criminal defense attorneys, because if I had their respect, then, if within the defense bar community, they knew I was a straight shooter. When it came to investigating pleas, when it came to questioning your investigation and things like that, let's cuff this case. We better start looking at a plea or whatever. So so that's kind of was my background. But there was a case involving I got it on appeal, and I wrote the appeal up to the Third Circuit on a constitutional issue. So there was a nurse that came out of work one night at Shadyside Hospital in Pittsburgh, and there's two guys laying in wait for her in a van. They abduct her, rape, and murder her. All right. What the Pittsburgh police do is they get a confession out of the one, and then they go to the second one, and he's not confessing. And then they, have the room wired up, and they put him in the, he's invoked his right to remain silent, right? So what they did is they put him in the room with the other one that just confessed, and that guy that they put in the room who invoked his right to remain silent said, "How much did you tell them?" And that statement was used in the trial, which later convicted him. Goes through the system, comes over to the federal public defenders on a habeas corpus. I, in that role, write the appeal, and I come up, find a case law.
Real quick, John,
Yeah.
Let everybody know, when you say it came up on habeas corpus, what does that mean? I mean, I know it's like Latin for right, produce the body, but what does that mean at that point?
So basically, it's a prisoner appeal after there's habeas corpus in the state, but also habeas corpus in the federal system. It's basically making a constitutional argument that your constitutional rights have been violated. And, after you're tried and convicted, you go through the appeal process, but you can allege, ineffective assistance of counsel, or you can allege some constitutional right violation. And after it goes through the state system, it pops over to the federal system, and then it could go all the way up to the Supreme Court from there. With that, but it's purely a constitutional argument. Somehow your due process rights or something was violated. In this case, what I argued in this appeal to the Third Circuit was that the police, by after he had invoked his right to silence, which is sacrosanct, right? We know that once somebody invokes their right, not in their right to an attorney, is sacrosanct. Once they invoke their right to an attorney, all questioning must cease. That's what we're taught in law enforcement. What they did is by putting him in that room, I argued that it was the same effect as questioning him, right? That they continuing questioning, and therefore his statement that he, how much did you tell them, being used against him, was a violation of his right to counsel and have counsel present.
But neither guy knew that the room was wired, right?
No, neither knew. But the Third Circuit bought off on my argument. And I had a problem with that, because now it's not that the guy went free. He had to be retrialed. But at that point, you're 15 years down the line, and, witnesses' memories fade, and I don't know what happened. But, so was it? Look, hey, it's really cool. It's an honor. You guys want to hire me as a federal public defender. I could be right out of law school, but just my heart at that point as a defense attorney, wasn't in it. It's a very necessary process, right? In our justice system, it's the hallmark of our justice system to be, represented by counsel.
Process.
Yeah, but it just wasn't. I knew for me, it probably wasn't the right fit at that point in my life. Could I, I'd defend people now. I'd have no problem with that. I just, but back
not at
then,
that time in your life, yeah.
Yeah,
and see how much. If we had let you tell the story, it would have been, I got out of law school, went to the FBI. We just glossed over 20 minutes of good shit because you needed to get, what was that, a Bloody Mary or a mimosa? I didn't see that.
That was the celery fell out of his cup.
I think it was a mimosa this morning. Yeah.
No, and the cool thing about that is, and our regular listeners hear us. We give defense attorneys a hard time, and most of the time it's in jest. We need that to maintain the judicial system, the rule of law that we practice and love here in the United States. And, there's no police officer I know of that wants to put an innocent person in jail. That's why we tolerate the system that we have. That's what makes us different from a lot of the rest of the world.
Let me tell you when a cop really wants a good defense attorney is when they're defending him from something.
Yeah.
That's when you have no problem having a good defense attorney. Yeah.
That's when you go to those attorneys that everybody MFs and, I'll never talk to that son of a bitch.
There are attorneys on both sides. There's cops, whatever. There's always an element in every profession that shouldn't be there. That's just the way life is, right? But I like what you said, John, that when you've got the respect, it was funny when you have a good relationship with the bar. Mine wasn't a big case, but as a trooper, I'm doing a DUI one time, and it was in a little town where I made the arrest, and I just got the streets transposed. It was avenue instead of street, whatever. And the defense attorney's making a big thing out of it. Everybody walks up to me, and under his breath, he goes, "Yeah, don't worry, I'll be done in 2 minutes." And then he goes, "It's just like, I get it. It's part of the thing." So,
but they have to. You have to give a vigorous defense of your client, right? But even though when you're going down in flames, you have to do that.
Hey, but let me ask you though, this. I'm going to ask you I don't want to talk about what came later and all your experience later, but just bookend it with this before we start getting into your FBI journey. How much impact did that have on you in terms of how you looked at cases and did cases an FBI agent, is having that experience, being on the other side initially, not later?
Oh, it was. Yeah, it was great. You because one, it was an introduction to, aside from just book knowledge and the going through law school and things like that, but it was a bare bones, and man, I'll tell you, even my last part of my career, or most of my career was spent in Fort Myers, Florida. I had all the respect in the world for the Federal Public Defender Service because they had really good attorneys, at least where I was. There's a couple, I won't mention their name, but man, they were tough, and they would hold you to, and hold your case to the fire, as they should. But there was no cutting corners, and I want to say true believers. But they were really. I found that the attorneys at the Federal Public Defender's Office in the Western District of Pennsylvania, their first love was the Constitution, right? Their first love was, ensuring that the rights of the accused are protected and upholding, the Constitution, and you just saw it from a different side. Not necessarily saying at that point in time I wanted to, serve in that role, but you had all the respect in the world, and I learned about the sentencing guidelines, and I learned about, really everything they deal with is like all the stuff you deal with as a cop, right? Is Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, suppression hearings, all that, bare bones, and you really had a really good working knowledge of how the law worked, and what the tricks of the trade were, and different how they would cross-examine people, and I just learned a tremendous amount. It was a great experience.
Oh, I got a question for you now. So you're in the academy, the FBI Academy there at Quantico, Virginia. Did you ever have to write any memos? Come on now, and this is honest. You're under oath.
Did you get in trouble?
No, never. No.
What?
No, I never was involved in an OPR my whole career. No, I never had an item of evidence suppressed at any point. Not that I didn't lose cases. I lost. Yeah, there's cases you lost, but yeah.
Everybody. That's just, you wish you had a perfect batting average, but that's just the way it goes. But so you never got in any trouble in the academy? You never showed up late? You never had to
Yeah, what are you, Mister?
You weren't out on a field training exercise and the bad guy parked his car and you went over and opened the door and looked at their script to see where they're going to be next or anything like that?
I'm trying to think. I can't think back that far, but I don't recall
Wait a
ever
minute, Murph. Is
being in
this a
trouble.
confession on your part?
I have no recollection of that, Your Honor.
You know, I didn't even go out and drink in the parking lot with the National Academy guys, until probably my last week there or something.
Oh, man, we used to go to Lunga Point on the weekends with a keg up there and meet those guys.
Yeah, I know, man. I know. DEA was different, man.
A little different.
All right, so we've got a Mr. Goody Two Shoes here. We're going to have to treat this. Your Honor, permission to treat the witness as hostile?
Absolutely, granted.
No, so no, but let me ask you. I was going to ask you a question around the academy too. Did you get any shit because you were had worked the defense side before joining the bureau? I mean, good natured or otherwise.
Yeah, during the interview and they used to do the interview a lot differently, right? And because of lawsuits and stuff, I think it was a bunch of nonsense. But you used to your initial interview, or actually, after you took the test and passed, and when you got your new agent interview, whether you're getting a thumbs up or thumbs down, they used to have these like they had grizzled street agents would do your interview for you, and that's where I picked up a lot of it. I mean, they gave me a hard time, but it's good. I mean, I even like the books that you read and the news articles, and I mean, what your interests were. I mean, they really went into a lot and almost like investigated. That was like almost 5 agents sitting around a table, and that's probably the way. I mean, I think our hiring process was probably a lot better back then, but
Well, it's like being in the Star Chamber when you go through those.
Yeah, really was.
You know what it reminds me of is that scene. Which movie was it? Was it The Gauntlet? No, not The Gauntlet, but it had Tyne Daly in there with Clint Eastwood as an Inspector Harry Callahan, and he's on her interview board. Well, tell me about your most important felony arrest, then, Inspector. Well, I've never made one. Well, maybe you can tell me about a parking ticket you wrote. And you could just see,
Dirty Harry,
man, just and then he ends up with this traditional, marvelous, and then she ends up being his partner. So, but yeah, that's it. But that's there was a joke of one of my former bosses used to be a executive assistant director at the bureau, and he talked about, and again, I'm not picking on the bureau. Everybody's got their guys. You wonder how the hell they got hired, and they go, "This guy's so dumb he couldn't find a brick in Old Town," and that's Old Town Alexandria has got nothing but bricks all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And the other question was, who was on this guy's interview board?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you go through your career and you see that, right? Every agency has them, and I remember my first supervisor, Eddie McLaughlin, who was like a legend in the FBI on the C6 drug squad, and his statement was, "Yeah, we got our fair share of a-holes." I mean, he used the word, but yeah, I mean, and you got to wonder, but hey, the place survives despite.
Well,
Yep.
every agency survives in spite of a few bad apples, and but the nice thing about it is 99.9% of all the people out there are good, honest, decent people. Like you, I want to do the job. I want to do it right. I don't want to send an innocent person to prison. You couldn't. Your conscience couldn't live with that. So, but let's talk about now getting into your FBI career. So you graduate the academy. What's your what? Tell us about the process for picking your first post duty. How do you go about? Do you get to put in suggestions, or do they just come out and tell you, "Hey, John, this is where you're going"? You're smiling. There's a story here. Okay.
As I used to say, it's a drunken monkey throwing darts at a dartboard.
There you go. That's a great explanation.
You might, I mean, it was the craziest thing because the only people that got to where they wanted to go. Their first pick was like New York, because if you came out of New York, you went back to New York, and I don't know if they still do it that way, but back then that was how it worked. They give you a list of choices. Back then, I think like 56 field offices, and you got to pick 12 or something like that. And back then you could either try to get to a small office, knowing that within 3 to 5 years you would be transferred to a large office, or you could get and then after that you can get your office of preference after you did your time in a big office. But everybody had to do a time in a big office. Then they, or in the alternative, you could pick a big office, and then after doing your time in a big office, and they didn't promise you 3 to 5 years, but after doing your time in a big office, you could get your office of preference. So it was an easier way to get back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which I never got back to. But so I went big office first. And then back then, I think there was like 12 major metropolitan field offices, New York, the Chicago's, Miami. And I picked, actually, I think my first choice is like Houston, because we thought, let's get somewhere. I'm married at this point, and I figured we'll get somewhere warm. And, we picked, but Washington, D.C. and Baltimore were like third and fourth. And I got the third pick to Washington. And there's no rhyme or reason for it. I mean, people that put in for East Coast were getting West Coast, and people putting in for the West Coast were getting East Coast. And it's just, no one got where they really wanted to go.
That drunken monkey was busy, wasn't he?
Oh,
yeah,
they always
yeah.
are.
It was just, there's a couple people that hit the lottery and they got exactly where they wanted to go, and they ended up staying. And then the cruel joke is, after I was in for a few years, they changed that people were, if you got to I think by the time, I guess it was, I'm trying to think who took over, but if you got, even if you were in a big office and you got sent to a small office, they changed that you didn't have to move in 3 to 5 years, and they, ran out of money to keep moving people around. So a lot of people stayed in like these nice cushy RAs and stuff for their whole career if they liked it. Resident agency, like small satellite offices out of a field office.
Yeah. One of my buddies was on the police department, got on the bureau. He spent, and I don't know how he managed it. He spent his 20 years in Oklahoma City. Never had to move.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if Oklahoma City was a big office back then or not, but.
Well, and it's expensive for these government moves, government employees. I think the last time I moved, they estimated the cost at between $100,000 and $125,000. So if you're picking up, how many agents do you have in the FBI? About 10,000, right?
Actually, gun and badge carriers, I think they're about 13 or 14,000 now.
So, I mean, if you even take 10%
employees
of those and move them every year, it's a phenomenal burden on the taxpayers, to be quite honest about it.
That's just like the military folks, doing a move all the time. My dad was military. I mean, it's like by the time I was in 5th grade, I was born at Fort Riley. We had moved to Fort Bragg, then went to Monterey, California, went to Iran, came back to Dodge City, went to South Bend, Indiana, and then back to good old Chapman, Kansas, all by the time I was in 5th grade.
Sounds like your dad couldn't hold a job there.
No, he could hold a job. I thought they were trying to get rid of me. They were moving without telling me where we were going.
Trying to lose you.
We've moved, Morgan. Don't bother looking for us. But
hey, John, when you're in the academy, when did you find out what your post was going to be? At the beginning or at the end, or when?
It was after. It was 16 weeks back then, so it would have been somewhere past the halfway point. You have that big night. They do it in the evening. They bring you down to the.
Is this like the Last Supper or something? Your final meal?
There's like a stage, and I mean, they bring you up, and I remember when we got it. There was a friend of mine. We probably the first day, we're still close friends till this day, but we met in the academy. Paul Timko and Paul and I, probably hit it off early on in the academy, and but so when we both got Washington field office, and when we looked at our orders, like, man, they must really think a lot of us. We're going to Washington field office, Meanwhile, it's the murder capital. I mean, it's just the highest violent crime in the country. It was just the old Buzzards Point field office had literally had rats in it. And, I mean, it was awful. But everybody commiserated.
Now, Buzzards Point, that was the real name of the location, right?
Yeah, Buzzards Point. I don't know if it's historically accurate, but the story that was told through the years was that's where, during the Civil War, they would bring the soldiers up from the dead soldiers up from the battlefields in the South, up the Potomac to the Anacostia River, and they would put them, on Buzzards Point while they were waiting for burial space over at Arlington across the river. So, therefore, the Buzzards. I don't know if that's true, but it kind of made sense.
Sounds like a good story. Yeah,
how blighted it was, because actually the first day I showed up, there was still there's still police tape on the sidewalk from a homicide that happened there the night before.
Welcome to DC.
Yeah, there was like a gangbanger bar, nightclub next door. I mean, there's always shootings happening there, and there's actually a couple agents I knew coming back from surveillance got in, shootings out in front of the building and stuff like that. It was was a
A little bit
crazy,
of a
crazy
wild west
times.
there, wasn't it?
Yeah, the wild thing is, I went back there. I was up for a conference back in March, and a buddy of mine, Aaron McGee, who I used to work with, he lives up in DC still, and he took us past there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is they tore down the building. I mean, they have this beautiful glass condo. There's outdoor cafes. You know, what I mean, it's just a spectacular what they did to that whole area. But
Neighborhood
it's
and
pretty.
transition.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to believe what it used to look like and what it used to be like.
Well, it's, did you ever go to the DEA office in DC back during that
Yeah,
time?
yeah,
So when
yeah.
it was down, I think it was on I Street.
Right.
You had to
Yeah.
go by the stripper club to get up to the DEA office.
Yeah, it was unbelievable, right? And that was a rough area too. I mean, with all of DC was pretty bad back then.
I was just at the DEA Academy a few weeks ago. My partner Javier and Pena and I got to speak to the basic agent trainees there. And so one of the questions I had was, when do you guys find out where you're going now? Because when I went through, you found out like a week before you graduated, and you still lost some people like that. But now they find out at the beginning. And they might even find out before they go into the academy because they got tired of spending the money on the backgrounds and have them go through all the training, and then they quit and go somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is right. I think it's the right thing to do.
So, oh no, it is. Like you say, the drunken monkey. When I got on the state patrol, I've told other folks for this, but you'll appreciate this, John. I was in Salina, Kansas. Another guy was in Olathe. Another guy was in Garden City. They took me in Salina, moved me to Garden City. The guy in Garden City moved him to Olathe, and the guy to Olathe moved him to Salina. Guys, you could have just left us there. We were already, anyway, I digress. There we go. Drinking game.
Number
That's
two.
number two. Yeah. Hey, but let's. So when you got through the academy, once you Washington D.C., yeah, you say murder capital. But from your wife's standpoint, though, I mean, you talk about law firms. Just you could throw a dart at it and hit 100.
Yeah.
Did that provide her any career opportunities moving to Washington D.C. when you guys went there?
Yeah, so she was with then Kirkpatrick Lockhart, now it's K&L Gates. It was like, it's like one of the top, I don't know, they're probably in the top 10 firms, multinational firm now. But yeah, they had an office in Washington. So she transferred. She was able to transfer down there. Not the same, litigation section, but yeah, she transferred. So it was, more seamless, than most people. And that was kind of one of the ideas of putting down where we, I was trying to get into a legal market that she could, continue her career,
So, but moving out there, first of all, what areas where did you end up living? Did you live in DC proper, around the burbs?
No, we lived way out. I mean, back then, now it's unrecognizable with the number of people that moved in the last 20 years, but we were out in an area called, now they call it this posh zip code. It's called Potomac Falls, right?
I know it.
Hot Falls.
Yeah.
Loudoun County, right down the road.
County.
Falls,
yeah, Loudoun County. So it was Cascades was the neighborhood. It was just like we were one of the first houses being built out there. It was a bunch of farmland, and there's actually barns that they tore down, and there was trees, and they came in and built roadways, and really you moved out as where you could afford a home, and we're pretty far out. I mean, it was a long commute. I can't even imagine what that commute would be like nowadays. I mean, because the roads haven't gotten any better, but it was tough back then.
Route 7 still sucks.
Back during that time, you could get on the toll road going in. And remember, you probably remember this. They used to have a trooper sitting over where the crossover was to get on the free road. And you just hit him with the blue lights, and he'd wave as you went by. And that way you got out of paying the tolls and you could get to work quicker.
And they finally put the silver line out that way for, people, I guess, commuting into DC.
Well, it's not in typical government fashion. It's not open yet. Cost overruns, and they've had the buildings, the parking centers, the garages done for a long time with electricity and everything going. Here we are wasting taxpayer dollars, and we yet still don't have. Anyway, but I digress. Number 3, drinking game. But you made me digress. So let's go back to your post in DC. What squad? Because tell people too, when you get assigned to something, you're on a squad. So what kind of squad did you get assigned to when you came out to DC, the Washington field office?
So Washington field office back then, everybody had to go to applicants and Carla B. Fad, character, associates, reputation. And if you got there during a presidential election year, you were screwed. Basically, you ended up, some people couldn't get off the applicant squad for, a year or 2 years sometimes during a presidential election year. But what they did is they did a little teaser.
Hold on a second. Yeah, when you say applicants, who's applying for what?
It's government employees. So the squad I was on, we did presidential appointments and DOJ attorneys, Department of Justice attorney background investigations. You interview neighbors, you interview, coworkers, go out and a lot of stuff's probably been contracted out. Now I think they still have, they still do background investigations like on our own employees, but back then, you were doing, and FBI still does the background investigations on, Supreme Court justices and, court and federal court judges and district court judges and things like that, magistrate judges.
Even when I hired on DEA, the Bureau did our background investigations back then.
Do everybody's. Now it's.
Did they take your gun away from me? Because, man, I'd want to commit suicide after 2 years.
Yeah, no, but what they did is they gave you a little teaser. You started out in Washington Field, and you got to spend 3 weeks on a criminal squad. So some people, my buddy Paul went to the bank robbery squad. I got on I think Paul was on a drug squad with me. I got on C6, was a drug gang squad. And, it was a bunch of old timers and doing like enterprise level cases, really good, amazing cases. And, one of them, the squad I was almost working, Rayful Edmond back at the time. Rayful Edmond 2, we call it, because first Rayful Edmond was a DEA case. He was the drug kingpin who had brought crack cocaine to Washington, D.C. 20 days on, a couple weeks on that, you go, there was a experienced, old timer agent, Steve Benjamin, kind of takes the young guys under his wing, and he's taking us out on search warrants. And I remember, first search warrant up in Northeast DC, Jamaican drug house. And, you're going out with, meeting different cops on the task forces were in their infancy. And we were, we had task force agents and different people, and you're going out on search warrants. And then, after a few weeks of having fun and living on the edge, you're going to go to, you go to this, squad doing background investigations. The thing was, though, back then, if you wanted to go to a, you're stuck. I only got stuck here about 8 months on background investigations. And then I got back to C6, that drug and gang squad. And that's where I wanted to be. But the way you did it too is in your free time, like after you did, you worked your, time in your AUO, you would volunteer for different squads if they had arrests, if they had search warrants, if they had surveillances. So
acronym alert, AUO.
Uncontrolled administrative uncontrolled overtime, right? Yeah. It was, you don't get paid overtime in the FBI. You get like a 25% stipend but they get their,
they get their money out of you, don't they?
Yeah, there's way more hours, and my wife will attest to that. I put in way more than what I ever got paid in AUO, but as we all did.
What was a standard? Well, speaking of that, so how many hours a week were you putting in?
Oh, back then, I mean, because you're trying to. I didn't want it. The Washington Field office has all the embassies, and so they had foreign counterintelligence squads, and so half the office worked FCI or fledgling is before 9/11, but they had a couple counterterrorism squads. Some people wanted to do that. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get in the thick of it. I wanted to do violent crime work and put cases together and work criminal investigations. So you had to try to vie your way onto one of these squads, and you did that by getting recognized by the supervisors and going out and volunteering. So fugitive arrests and things like that. There's a group of us, we would always raise our hand. Even, when we were done with we had a pretty cool supervisor, Manny Johnson, on the applicant squad. And, he knew the game, and he basically, you get your work done, then you can go out and play with the criminal squads, or then you can go out and do stuff. Or you did it in the evenings when you were done. So, you would work a full day, and then, if there was something going on at night and you were trying to get to that squad, you'd go and basically volunteer your time and go out and get involved in it. And that's how you got back to a criminal squad. And that's how I got to a criminal squad. Paul got to a C4, which was the bank robbery squad. And that's kind of how we did it.
Yeah, so that's the reason you were able to only cut your time in purgatory to 8 months is because you went out and did a lot of volunteering with the other folks, got recognized, and got onto the squad. What made you want to? What was it about? Was it about gangs? Was it about drugs? What is it both? What was it about that particular thing? I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with bank robberies. There's a lot of stuff going on, with violent crime. Why did this particular squad interest you so much?
It was the time, it was a time, I guess, in history, that DC, when I say DC was out of control, the crack epidemic hit like between 86 and 87. Um, I think, actually because of Murph and DEA's activities down in Colombia, there was in the early 80s, actually cocaine use in the U.S. was going down, and there was a high supply, lower demand. The introduction of crack, I mean, I think that's a fascinating story in and of itself, other than the false narratives are out there that the CIA or the U.S. government,
I know.
but it's a bunch of BS. But I mean, but basically it was marketing on the part of, think about that. Look back at like freebasing, right? What was the comedian? Richard Pryor, right?
Richard Pryor, yeah.
Richard Pryor, like cocaine was the wealthy person's drug. It was, with the starlets, with the sports people, the high net worth people use coke in the U.S. and the poor, the underprivileged, the everybody else didn't, and they in freebasing, I think, was started. You used to mix ether, alcohol, and cocaine, and that was the only way you could vaporize it, because you can't just burn cocaine and expect it to vaporize. You have to get to a certain temperature, and it was a very dangerous operation that people tried, and people would blow up, or at a high degree of heat, it would explode and they would burn. And like the late Richard Pryor, I mean, he was horribly disfigured after experimenting with freebasing. But that was essentially what crack did. Some the Colombians, the cartels, they had chemists, right? They paid a lot of money, they made a lot of money, and they figured out ways to improve their product, and either by guesswork or by hiring good scientists, they figured out that putting baking soda, right, in cocaine, mixing it together and boiling it, right, you could get cocaine. It didn't change the chemical compound any, but I think it made it into rock form. And correct me, you're the DEA guy, but you could, by making that change, or that you could, a small amount of crack cocaine could be smoked, and the vapors, as opposed to snorting it, went immediately into your lungs, and you got a euphoric high from what addicts would tell you. And they were always chasing that first high, to get that, and that's why it was so highly addictive. And then, so going back like 1986, before I'm even in the FBI, there's this thing called crack. I think it hit like 28 cities, and then one of them being Washington, D.C. Then the violence that came along with protecting that drug trade, and affected mostly, Black and predominantly African American communities, and there was calls by, actually, if you look back historically, the Charlie Rangel and the Congressional Black Caucus and Kwasi Mfume and all these people, they were pushing, strict drug laws, because it was just devastating the communities. And this was like this scourge, so you have to go like the raison d'etre, the spirit of the times. This is like this scourge that came up on this country, and was just, the number of like babies being born to addicted to crack, and the number of when it first came out, people figured, use the same amount of crack, right, that you would snort. And then I think you just had like ridiculous numbers of overdoses, and hospitals are being overwhelmed. Emergency rooms are being overwhelmed with overdoses. But by the late 80s, every year in every major city, DC being the worst, but in every major city, the bodies just were piling up. I mean, the homicide rates were through the roof. The violent crime rates were through the roof. And that's when I came of age. That's when I came into the Bureau. And that's, you're fighting for the soul of America. You're protecting freedom and liberty and all that stuff. But this is where the fight was. The fight was in the drug war. The fight was
Fight was at the street level. I mean,
in
that's
the
where it was
street
happening.
level. That's where it was happening. And I mean, let me spend a few minutes, and I don't want to, digress too much because I know you want to get in the story, but I'll start with a quote. He who forgets the past is doomed to repeat it. Right. And unfortunately, I think we're forgetting the recent past with the current false narratives that are out there. But let's set the stage for what DC was like and what crack was doing. These were not, essentially you had this wave, and it was done for, I believe the historical fact of it is, the Colombians, a big chunk got taken out of, we'll give Murphy and Javier and DEA, the countless numbers of DEA agents that were working that, by taking down the Medellin cartel and Pablo Escobar and the, knocking away at that. I mean, that was a big hit to them, right? And their market share was going down. And there was, and the price of cocaine was also going down. The profit margin on cocaine was going down because, again, it was the rich person's drug. It was the drug of the movie stars and sports figures and things like that. They needed to, access a different market. So what crack did for them, and again, either they did it by luck or they, through science and a lot of scientific experiments by hiring phenomenal scientists to rework it. But by a very simple process, they were able to make what is legally known as cocaine base, right, in the law. And essentially it's just mixing sodium bicarbonate, which is nothing more than baking soda, an 88-cent box of baking soda that you can get in any grocery store, boiling it, coming to a base form. It allows it to be smoked, where up to that point, powder cocaine could not be smoked. It would burn up. You have to get it to a certain, for it to vaporize, and it was able to vaporize. And it gives a quick euphoric high that does not last like powder does. It enters the bloodstream through the lungs more immediately into the blood supply, as opposed to snorting it, going through your nostrils, going through your blood vessels and things like that, which snorting cocaine, my understanding, you correct me, you're the DEA expert, but snorting cocaine gives you a longer high, whereas crack cocaine gives you a quicker high. A very small amount is all you need, or you're going to overdose on it. And then, so with that, they were able to introduce it to a whole market, mostly underprivileged areas. Predominantly, they market it directly to the African American community in this country, in the inner cities, and that's where that, and from that, the gang activity, the control of the drug markets, there was just this tsunami of violent crime that hit every American city. And like I said, it started out, in the early 80s and through the mid 80s when, by 1986, there's probably 28 cities that had crack introduced to it. By 87, within a year, it completely flipped and it was all over America. And all of American cities are experiencing drive-by shootings and things we never heard of up to that point, right? Common in today's news, but and let's just go with the numbers here, okay? The direct and proximate result of the crack epidemic led to the violent crime epidemic. All right, 1985. Let's go with just Washington D.C. All right. 5 years before I'm just getting into law school, tale of two cities, right? I'm the kid from Pittsburgh. I'm getting ready to go to law school. I graduate college. I'm working full time. 1985, there's a kid about my age, right, by the name of Rayful Edmond. And Rayful Edmond, by the age of 22, is controlling 60% of the crack cocaine market in Washington, D.C. 1985, there's 147 homicides in D.C., high homicide rate, right? 1986, it goes up to 194. 87, 225. 88, 369. DC starts peaking into the murder capital category. 434 in 89. 472 the year that I got to DC, graduated from the academy and get there. 91, 482. 92, 450s. By 94 it starts going down, but even 94 broke the area record for homicide. So if you take the surrounding counties, that broke all records, for per capita nationwide. It had 703 homicides just in the DC metro area. And it was all related to the crack trade and control of the crack market. So digress a little bit. 86. Rayful Edmond is this kid who grows up on the streets. By the age of 9, his mother has him as a lookout and then running heroin and pills. She's a heroin and pill sales, and she has him, brings him into the drug trade at the age of 9. He's running drugs. He's a smart kid. I believe he had a scholarship or could have had a scholarship to any college, chose the drug trade over college because, that's where he had been. There's probably, at least with the Rayful Edmond organization, he ends up at the age of 22. He's so good at what he's doing. From the age of 9, he's running the streets, lookouts for police. And there's a area they created called the Strip down at Morton Street Northeast in Washington, D.C. And it's relevant because that's, I believe, the shooting that I later get involved in is probably a proximate result of drugs that Rayful brought in. But even though a specific gang was responsible for that shooting, but it was likely his drugs that were selling it. But so Rayful owns basically the crack cocaine market in Washington, D.C. Along with that, the attendant homicides are piling up. He's running around flaunting cash back in the day, gold-plated rims on a Jaguar, the whole, 9 yards like you see in the movies. And this guy is like, basically his character has been used in subsequent movies. He's still, serving multiple life sentences in federal prison, although they're trying to get him out because of all the, the redemption or the actual, cooperation he did after he was taken down in Rayful Edmond 2. 19 DEA, Washington Metropolitan Field Police Department target him, target his organization, his mother, everybody, and eventually they arrest him because he is the drug kingpin. He is the guy who was going out, made contacts with people out in LA, getting drug source from LA that had a direct source into Colombia, bringing it right back into DC. This guy is, he's the guy at the fights. He's at the basketball games. He drives around Washington, DC, handing out $100 bills to kids in the neighborhood. I mean, this is, but again, he's also the guy that brought this horrible drug that's addicted and is causing so much pain to the city, right? He's seen as
just to add to that, John, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but he was getting his dope from the Trujillo Blanco brothers.
That was 2. Yeah. Rayful Edmond 2. I'll get to that. Yeah. So that's the interesting part, and that's kind of where I come into it after. So it's an unprecedented trial, 100 witnesses. The jury is kept behind bulletproof glass. The marshals take them to a different hotel every night, for their protection. Rayful Edmond is kept in prison down in Quantico, Virginia during the trial. He's helicoptered up into D.C. It's a big spectacle. He and the rest of the crew, they are sentenced to, I think, 2 life sentences at that time. That was a DEA case up until 89. 2 years before, or a year before I get in the bureau. And then he's put in Lewisburg Federal Prison. End of story, right? Not really. Bodies are still piling up in D.C. Crack is still king. And that's one thing.
Hey, John, real quick, when he went to prison, was there anything that declined? Was there anything that was impacted as a result of him being taken off the street? Or did he run this from prison?
Well, that's the fun part of the story, right? So I get to um, I get to the Washington field office in 1990. The violent crime and epidemic is still, you're deep into the tsunami, right? You're not even in the eye of the hurricane yet, and it's just, there's shootings and random shootings and things spilling into, Georgetown and areas frequented, restaurants and things like that. And it was just really a city under siege. It was literally like a war zone. I really think it's probably the closest this country came to a civil war prior to, the 1860s. You had the National Guard patrolling parts of Washington D.C. I mean, it was just hard to fathom. I mean, it wasn't uncommon. I say the signature sound of the city back then. When you were out and with your detective partner out, in Southeast DC was like, the staccato ring of automatic weapon fire. I mean, you were getting calls on the radio all the time, shots fired and different things happening. It was pretty much mayhem, right? In our nation's capital. Totally different than what it is now, although, that's starting to peak up. But I mean, it was unrecognizable compared to what it is. So Rifles.
I just want to put a fine point on that. People are looking at today thinking, oh, it's getting bad. To your point, if you go back and think history, and it's not that long ago in history, we have too short of a view of history. You're talking about in the 80s, they were killing nearly 500 people a year. The drug trade was up. Crack was an epidemic, right? And that's the point I want to make sure we hammer home on this is you can't look at today just in the prism of today. You have to look at today as what went on before, because if you don't solve the problems, this is exactly where it's going to go back to. We're going to go back to 300, 400, 500 homicides a year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so disingenuous, and we probably don't want to go there. But a lot of these political leaders now and stuff that made their name, on, Eric Holder was a U.S. attorney in Washington D.C. during that time. It was Eric Holder. Who had the MVP list, most violent persons list. You knew you couldn't take people off the streets on homicide because of witnesses and, witnesses getting killed or threatened and things like that. And the idea was get them off by any means necessary. Jaywalking, being facetious, but, take them off the streets on a gun charge, take them off on a drug charge, whatever way you can get, DEA, FBI, Washington Metropolitan Field Office, everybody pulled their sources together and identified who the 100 most violent persons were in the city, and they were targeted to get taken off the street as a way to reduce crime. I believe that's how that problem was solved back then. We forget about that, and then this whole false narrative out there that police are evil and that we're inherently our justice system, which is the greatest justice system in the world, plenty of problems, right? But travel the world and see what else is out there. I mean, it's still we're not inherently, I don't believe, I mean, we got lots of problems, but we're not inherently racist, and our system isn't inherently racist. This whole, the crack epidemic was so severe, everybody was calling for it. Didn't matter, your income. I mean, the people that lived in these neighborhoods that their neighborhoods were taken over by gang activity, that the political leaders of all stripes and parties were calling for it. I mean, you can look it up in the congressional record. Charlie Rangel back then accused Ronald Reagan of not being tough enough on crime. With the crime bill that came out in the late, I think it was like 1987 crime bill or something like that. But I mean, that is a stage that I think people need to go back and say, this is what things were. I mean, this is how things were back then. And how did the tide turn that, now we're, unfortunately, I think we're getting back there. But I digress. So Rafel is in jail now. He's in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, and Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary had a lot of the drug traffickers, but they also had the Colombian drug traffickers, the Trujillo Blanco brothers. And then their mother, Griselda, was known as the Black Widow, right?
There is a tie-in. So you folks, you've heard us talk about this before. Griselda is room temperature now because the Colombians have a long memory of stuff. But
It's amazing. Sorry to interrupt for a second. It's amazing. You just mentioned that. I knew kind of where you were going, Steve. But when you think about Griselda Blanco, we had George Young as our second guest on here. When he knew about her, never really dealt with her. But you look at this world, you think it's a big world, but in the world of dope trafficking, it's actually a very small world as well, too, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And you got, Griselda was Pablo's representative in South Florida. And she herself, I mean, why would any man marry her when she's already got the nickname the Black Widow, meaning her husbands die?
Well, Steve,
They die very violently too.
Tell John about your presentations. You do a whole presentation. Don't you put a picture up there of Griselda and basically say, kind of like, oh, God, look at this?
Oh, yeah, she's uglier than shit. I mean, just look her up. Google her. Anyway, back to you, John. Sorry.
We digress. Drinking game, that's number 3. Go ahead.
So Rayful Edmond gets in there into Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, and in the Bureau of Prisons, wisdom, they put all the drug dealers and traffickers and the major offenders in Lewisburg, just up the road. I mean, it's a couple hours from Washington, D.C. And Rayful hooks up with the Trujillo Blanco brothers in prison. Their roommates are on the same, on the same thing, right? Cell block, yeah. So Rayful, basically Steve Benjamin, who was the case agent down on C6, has, old time case agent, had lots of informants out there. And Steve's the guy that took all the young guys under his wing. Steve was married to the Bureau, except on Friday nights because he raced stock cars, out in Southern Maryland. And, but basically, Steve, was the guy that took us all out and gave each of us a part of his big case. It was Steve and Jimmy Cottle, who were the 2 case agents on the Rayful 2, the Rayful case out of Lewisburg. At that time, and actually it came out of the Rayful case, jail calls weren't recorded from prisoners. And now we have this system that, anytime you can listen in on a jail call, they tell the prisoner that their call is being monitored. But up until that point, jail calls weren't being, and as a result of the Rayful Edmond case, Congress had hearings and things like that, and they funded having Bureau of Prisons jail calls recorded. Now that's a standard. Every state and county prison does the same thing. But Rayful gets up there, gets with the Trujillo Blanco brothers. They are part of the Medellin cartel, correct? And they are, and they now have their sources on the other side. Mom, Griselda, or their South Florida sources in a direct pipeline into Colombia, whereas Rayful didn't have the direct pipeline into Colombia. He had to go through a third middleman. He's still supplying 60% of the crack cocaine in Washington, D.C. He gets with them, and they start connecting each other. This Trujillo Blanco brothers being the supplier, and Rayful having all his lieutenants and people still out there, and people that want to work for Rayful because he's Rayful Edmond, right? And he starts directing his drug trafficking organization from the prison phones in Lewisburg. FBI goes up, Squad C6, Squad I broke out of applicants, and I got over there, and I was just one little tiny cog in the wheel, right? I wasn't the case agent on it, but, we were running wiretaps on all the people on the outside of Rayful's organization, listening in, and then Rayful, doing the jail calls. And there's a funny story from that. So this guy is like, it was amazing. We were running out of the old post office building on the top floor of the post office building in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. We were up high because back then, the old equipment, you had to have the microwave that shot in. And we had a camera on the payphones. He'd go to the payphone every day. He'd pick up. He'd call one of his girlfriends or call somebody on the outside, and then it'd ask him to do a 3-way. And they would 3-way, and he would give direction on, where a pickup was going to be or whatever. And you had wires going on the Trujillo Blanco brothers doing the same thing, but bringing in the cocaine. And then the squad had surveillance teams out, and they were, picking off supplies as they came in, or working with, back then it was customs, if things were coming in via, commercial airliner, they were into different places. But that was basically, for months and months and months and almost a year, more than a year, there's just wire after wire. And I think I worked every holiday. I worked July 4th. I was up in Lewisburg. I worked Thanksgiving Day. It was a pretty brutal schedule, but it was that kind of sacrifice that ended up eventually bringing down Rayful Edmond and bringing down, that the rest, putting it, nail in that coffin, or, putting the spike in the heart, I guess. Rayful eventually, I'm getting ahead years, but Rayful ends up, cooperating with the government. And then they set up all these people on the outside, and the whole thing comes, gets rounded up,
Hey,
and that's
John, real quickly, before we go too far in the future, but what you're saying is Rayful went to prison. That was Rayful Edmonds 1, but while he's in prison, you make Rayful Edmonds 2 case. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, DEA did Rayful Edmond 1, put him in prison, put him in for 2 life sentences, but that didn't stop him. He continued. Once he gets in prison, he hooks up with the Trujillo Blanco brothers in prison, and they start supplying. He and the Trujillo Blanco starts running.
Right, and that makes your second case. Got it.
Right, and that makes the second case. And they start running the drug empire and running all the cocaine in D.C. out of Lewisburg Federal Prison in Pennsylvania. It's an amazing.
To that point, one of the reasons we'll talk about it later, but just kind of book in this because this leads into your incident, your shooting. With Rayful Edmonds, did one of the reasons he cooperate was simply because he saw what he was looking at? I mean, this dude is going to be doing life, and life, right? I mean, he is.
Yeah.
They're going to pump sunshine to this guy. Rule 35, right? He cooperates. He wants to cooperate. Was that the reason he decided to cooperate with you, or was there other reasons?
No, the other was basically to save his mother. His mother was rolled up in that, and then they cut a deal that they would not bring additional charges or as severe charges on his mother, and so that's pretty love of
that's
mother.
That's some significant leverage. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing is too is this. Look, and this goes back to cooperation and what we do in law enforcement, right? Whether you're a criminal, unless you're a sociopath, some type of behavioral based crime, sex offender, something like that, right? But they have a mission. In Rayful's case, it's making tons of money, flaunting cash, whatever, and running a drug empire. I think a lot of us, who worked in law enforcement, always, scratch our head and say, you know what? Whether it's a fraud guy, whether it's a drug dealer, these guys could be the CEOs of major corporations if they put their mind to it and, did legitimate business as opposed to illegal, illicit business, right? I mean, Rayful Edmond probably on the scale, if you gave him some type of aptitude test, I mean, he's probably on the brilliance level. At least, he doesn't have an MBA, but like his business sense is probably like phenomenal. And you could probably put his mind up against, a lot of, top business leaders in the country, but they choose. I think free will, you choose the side of evil over good,
Their business model is you do what I tell you, or I kill you, or I torture you, or I'll kill somebody in your family. So, you got to get around that.
Yeah. I agree with that. But I'm just saying purely like if they put their mind to, they have the ability, right, they could be successful in legitimate ends if they wanted to. That's the point I'm making. Yeah. I mean, their business models, evil, right? But yeah, but they have the ability, if they did it different.
It's that business acumen. I mean, if you're talking about, they take over an entire country, basically an entire region. And your point too is if they could apply that same business acumen, the business skills. But that's the point is then you go back to, is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it, could they have made different decisions?
You
but
choose
at the
the
end of the
forces
day,
of evil over good, that's basically what separates the criminal from, the rest of us, right? They choose, evil, the darkness of evil, or, the allure of evil over good. And I think that's really what you deal with day in, day out in law enforcement. But it just always fascinated me, because this guy was just the one interesting thing came out of that, and you could go like Biography Channel, I think, did some kind of story, and if you go to biography.com, I was reading about it years later, and they say, there was this the U.S. Attorney's Office or the prosecutors had to get some special translator to translate this special Pig Latin code that Rayful Edmond was using on the phones. There's no special translator. Look, pride is the root of all sin, right? But I will take credit for this. That special translator they're talking about is John Kuchta. Okay. I went to a city high school. It was, we were bused across the city. It was a racially mixed high school. And I come on to I graduated in 1981, so I come on to the wiretap in 1992, and I think it was Aaron McGee and Rich Klein, the late Rich Klein, who again was another Bureau legend. They're scratching their head and they're like, we don't know what happened. They started talking this special language, and we can't figure out. It's like some kind of pig Latin or something, And so, okay, so I get on and I start, it's the old reel-to-reel tapes, right? The old days, the old magnetic tape. And I start listening, and we used to dub everything onto a cassette tape, and you made like multiple copies. One was the Evans copy. I start listening, and I'm like, this is what they're saying. They're speaking double Dutch, right? So when I went to high school, my senior year in high school, everybody spoke this language. It was like a slang, like an inner city kind of slang language, probably
Give us an example.
You'd put an IZZ after like the first letter, first syllable. But you could, once you did that, you had to talk like Mizurfy, it would be Murphy. It wasn't anything complicated. But when you're talking real fast and you're spitting it out and you're really good at it, we just used to goof around and talk like this in high school. And it was like something was picked up. And there was actually back then it was rap music before there was hip hop. There's a guy, I think it was a Philadelphia artist, Frankie Smith or something like that. But he came out with this hit song. It was like the top song on the R&B charts back then. It was called the Double Dutch Bus. And he would talk double Dutch through this whole, he would sing double Dutch through this whole song. And the funny thing is I'll go way forward now, 2008. It's like my kids are watching the Disney Channel, and I think, remember, there's some TV show, That's So Raven or something. But Raven, the girl that was the Disney star, she re-releases that song. All right, and I'm like, what the heck? It's like my mind goes back to like Rafe Wedman, the wiretap, double Dutch. This translated secret code. It wasn't anything. It was just double Dutch.
Boys, we're baffled. We've got the best minds in on it, our cryptographers, and it's called what? All you had to do is bring Snoop Dogg in. He goes, yeah, I can translate this faux shizzle. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. But the beauty of it is like, and you're in law enforcement. It's you have fun with it. But like we had like a whole board of like Rafe Wedman isms, like his different quotes and stuff like that. It was just hilarious. And until this day, like we run into, you're long retired and you see people in the squad, or you talk to people that you used to work with, and we started all talking this double Dutch amongst each other. We're at work, and it just became like the squad talk that we started talking the way that Rayful was talking on the wiretap, this secret code that
he's converting you guys over.
Secret code. We did this in high school. Yes.
Yeah.
The CIA is baffled. The NSA can't figure this out. John Kuchta. Oh yeah, I got this.
Yeah.
Talk to any kid that went to John A. Brashear High School back in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and they'd tell you. This is.
How did you pronounce Murphy's name? What was it called?
Mizurfy. Yeah,
that's going to be your new name, Mizurfy.
Yeah.
Mizurfy.
You carry on a whole conversation like that, and it just, and then it just, I don't know, that's all it was. It was just, and it was funny, like looking, because you used to do like, you do the old logs almost like on an Excel spreadsheet, but you'd write it in, handwriting, like the agents are like kind of writing in what it is, and it was all double Dutch.
So now,
so Morgan, when you call me that and I don't answer, you'll know why.
Yeah, Mizurfy.
Yeah.
Hey, so I can just imagine real quick. I can just imagine because, when you're in court and you're going to testify about something, they have to lay foundation. So I can just see this going in. So Agent Kuchta, let's lay the foundation. You went to this high school. You are an expert in double Dutch. Your Honor, I'd like to voir dire the witness. I can just see them laying the foundation to establish you as an expert.
Luckily, Rachel pled and it never got that far. But yeah, yeah. And then I think he ended up testifying against co-conspirators, so he could, if it ever came up, he could. I don't think anybody went to trial that. Yeah.
What was? And I don't know if you've gotten to it yet, but I wanted to ask you, what was his sentence in Rayful 2?
I'd have to look that up because I was off the squad. I got off the squad and then got to the the other squad. But
I did look it up. It's 30 years.
30 years. Okay. And then he got a Pennsylvania hit too. He got hit in Pennsylvania also. I think
I didn't see that.
He got nailed down in DC, and then he also got, or maybe they did like a global type settlement, but there's still the Pennsylvania, Middle District of Pennsylvania, because Lewisburg was over the line in a different district. So that's the one that's still holding him from him getting out. But I mean,
was he tied to any murders directly?
Not direct. So indirectly, the group was tied, they say, to 30 murders. But again, he solved a lot of closed homicides afterwards. I mean, they just debriefed him, and he laid out, and he set everybody up on the outside, and just really, I mean, overall, look, I believe in redemption, and I believe, sinners can be saved, and it certainly was the root cause of the violent crime and all the murders, and but
so what happened in 2021 on
as
his
far
sentencing?
as his sentencing, I think
terms.
what's holding it up is they can't. I think the judge was Judge Sullivan up in D.C. What I've been kind of following a little bit is Judge Sullivan put out a. They almost did it was like a never before done study. Like they went out and they talked to people in DC, and they, the effects and what the temperature was of giving him because he had caused so much destruction. He was the root cause of so much destruction in that city during that, late 80s time period, bringing crack in. I think they almost did polls, and they interviewed victims and things like that. And I think they ended up giving him, they cut his sentence way down, that he should be able to get out. But the thing that they're still, what my understanding is, it's still the Middle District of Pennsylvania still has that conviction up there too. I think that's the 30-year. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's
the
what's
research I saw. That's what I saw as well. So here's the whole point. This guy, his first rifle one, was sentenced to 2 life sentences without parole, plus additional years for other crimes that he committed. And then he goes into prison and continues to deal death and drugs to the streets of D.C., where the murder rate is out of control, our nation's capital. And here we are in 2021. Oh, we're going to give him credit for time served on those 2 life sentences without frickin' parole. And you know as well as I do, John, when they issue the judgment committal order, once he's sentenced, it has on there date of release, and it's what is filled in there is upon death. Now, here's this guy that's responsible for, his organization is responsible for as many as 30 murders, unbelievably increased the death rate to innocent citizens in the Metro DC area.
And how many babies were born in premature because their mothers were addicted to crack? Yeah.
Now we're looking at letting this man walk out. Pennsylvania, hang in there. Don't let him out. He earned this. He deserves everything he got. Did he help solve some murders? Yeah, but that was the right thing to do. That doesn't absolve him of everything else he's done. This shit.
Well, look, and his mom got a deal out of it too. So the question is, on the scales of justice, how does that balance out? Again, it's one of those things, for us folks, in the field, those decisions are always taken out of our hands. We might get a little bit of input, but so let us kind of now start setting the stage, because what I want to do is, you've laid out a ton of great groundwork, a lot of history about what's going on in DC. We understand how violent it is, because really your story is really nothing more than just extreme violence. But before we get there, we had a quick discussion on a break before we came back on. And there is another case. He's going to introduce us to the case agent, Brad Garrett. But in 1993, there was a shooting in front of CIA headquarters. 2 employees were killed, 3 were wounded. And the guy they tracked down, I don't want to give this guy any airtime, so we said his name during the break. I'm not going to give him any airtime here. But they tracked this guy all the way to Pakistan, finally found him. He's brought back. Spoiler alert, this guy's executed in 2002. He is now room temperature. But they did erect a shrine to his name in Pakistan, in one of the tribal areas out there. But
Fatah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but let's talk about that real quick, because I just threw that out there, said, do you happen to know this guy? And then you blew me away by telling me what?
So I was on my daily commute into Washington, D.C., down the George Washington. Before I got to I used to go down Georgetown Pike on the way in. I'd pass CIA headquarters. And that particular morning, I was the first FBI agent that rolled up on that scene after the shooting had happened. And just it's sort of like, when we're in this job, you're like kind of at the crossroads of history. You know what I mean? You don't look, I could tell all kinds of, how I've been connected to big cases. Not that I worked them or anything. It's just, you just happen to be in the right place at the right time, at the wrong place at the wrong time. And, yeah, I mean, so I was just coming into work that day, and that's when, the shooting had occurred. I mean, there was, bodies outside of cars, Fairfax police were arriving.
How did you hear about it? Did think did you have a radio in your car too? I mean, were you monitoring the local
Yeah,
channels?
yeah, yeah. I was monitoring. You always monitored we had I had a handheld MPD radio. We had the Fairfax County channel, which I used to drive through, and then you had the, and then you had the bureau radio. But yeah, no, I mean, I called out, what was going on, and
How close were you to the scene when the initial reports came out?
I mean, I was probably, it was literally, they hadn't had the road closed on yet. You know what I mean? I pulled right in, and, police cars are just coming,
Did you didn't hear any gunshots, did you?
No, 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 no. I was just sitting in traffic. I was probably back in, listening to like the Howard Stern show or something on my way in.
That's something educational.
Yeah, exactly. Then, I got so sick of Howard Stern. He like went so far over the top. You know what I mean? Howard Stern was like, I look at like, it's like a bowl of chicken soup, right? Yeah, it tastes good, but then you drop a turd in it. It's like, you're not going to eat that. You know what I mean? And it's like,
Just ruins the whole thing.
it has all that. Yeah. I mean, so I started listening to like books on tape, and I actually did get educated. I used to like listen to, books on tape on my long hour and 15-hour-and-a-half commute, depending on traffic, every day.
Well, let's just kind of close out. I don't want to give too much away because we want to get Brad on. But how long? But again, you weren't the case agent assigned, but you're the first one on the scene. Just give us a general look. Have us look through your eyes. What are you seeing while you're there?
Carnage. I mean, it's carnage. I remember, car. It was like in the turning lane, car door opened. I mean, it was just, it was, it was carnage. I think he used an AK-47 probably. Actually, a real good friend of mine, he's my son's godfather. He was a Fairfax County police, ended up becoming a police officer. And, he was a Fairfax County police officer, ended up becoming an FBI agent. Jim Lewis actually got the call, I think, later that day. I didn't even know Jim Lewis at that time. Later, we met and stuff, but and became friends ever since then. And Jim Lewis actually showed up at Miramar Kanzi's apartment. They sent him by himself, knock on the door, like after yeah, right. Thank God.
Holy cow.
Jim, yeah, hey, Jim, thank God you're alive. He wasn't there, but I mean.
Well, but that's where they found the AK-47, tied the ballistics to it that identified him. But by that time, he had scooted over to Pakistan. So let's just we'll wrap that up. Like I said, we don't want to give away a whole lot because we'd love to get Brad. And hey, look, even Jim, I mean, that would be these are cases, like you say, you may not work all the big cases, but when you have an intersection with them, when you have a little piece of it, it's like these are stuff that live with you. So that was a major case. The fact that they're able to track this guy down, find him, get him back. It's a testament to I mean, we all good-naturedly kid when you're in the military, you kid every branch. When you're in law enforcement, you kid every agency. But I will tell you, just from one, cop to another, what a tremendous piece of work by the FBI to find this guy, to work collaboratively, because as you said, there's a DEA element involved in this over in Pakistan to find
Huge
this guy.
DEA element. It was DEA sources. It was DEA agents in Pakistan, the overseas attaché DEA working sources over there that identified his location. And I mean, there's a lot
But at the end of the day, yeah, it doesn't matter what color your uniform is. Everybody bleeds blue. So it's at the end of the day, you want to find this SOB, get him back. So but we'll save that but anyway, it's like those things you have touch points. So, but let's start setting the context for your incident, because it involves a shooting. It involves a significant shooting in Washington, D.C. At the police station. So let's start setting the context for what the time, what was going on in DC at the time, what squad you were on, and the building. Why'd you happen to be in there? So let's start getting into the context.
So again, murder rate's out of control. I'm sitting on wiretaps. I'm just one little small piece of a big investigation worked by others. And I honestly, I wanted to get out and run my own cases, and I wanted to, be on a more the Rayful Edmond case, Rayful Edmond 2 in Lewisburg was going on, and that was more of a macro, view of the drug world and stuff. And I wanted the more micro. I wanted on the streets, jumping out, being more like, quick hits and single hitters, I guess, taking out people and getting that. No, okay. But anyhow, so they started. Let me go back. So they started the Major Gang and Crime Task Force. I raised my hand. I got off of Squad C6 and I went to Squad C21. There, Mike Miller, who was a veteran agent, had done time at headquarters, was from the Washington, D.C. area. He had left headquarters and came back to, his home of Washington Field Office, second or third office agent, experienced, agent. He was on that. Then Martha Dixon, that's where I met her. She was second office agent, first female SWAT agent. She was out of Knoxville Division, again, fellow Pittsburgher. So we hit it off right away. And she was got the Washington field because, that's only 4 hours away from Pittsburgh, and she was trying to get Pittsburgh OP was like impossible to get. Like, I'll tell you another story. I'm probably 17 years in the bureau at this point. I'm like down in Fort Myers, RA. It's February, Fort Myers Resident Agency out of Tampa Division. I'm walking to federal court. I get a call from the SAC. Hey, John, got news for you, but I think we know what your answer is. It's like 70 degrees out. It's beautiful. I'm going to testify in a case, and sunny skies, blue skies in Florida in the middle of winter.
And an opening in Alaska came up.
No, you have your 17 years later. You got your OP to Pittsburgh. And I'm like, do you want it? I'm like, nah, I'm good. I'm good, man.
I'm good, bro. I'm good, yeah.
I'm good. So anyhow.
Let me trade 70-degree weather for snowstorms, ice storms, below zero temperatures. But you could have gone to a Steelers game, waved your terrible towel, and freezing your cojones off.
You didn't want to go back to drinking Iron City beer again? Come on.
Yeah, exactly, man. No thanks. But anyhow, but it was impossible to get to Pittsburgh. I mean, so Martha, she transferred, out of Knoxville Division to Washington to get even closer to get to Pittsburgh, to be, close to family and friends and things like that. But that's how it was. So we got on this violent crime task force. It was, typical, throw bodies at the problem, and it wasn't real well organized. And we were partnered up with a detective, but it was, we were out doing search warrants, and they kind of flooded the zone in Southeast DC where the majority of homicides were working. And we were, working alongside the 7th District police. And I mean, it was wild. I mean, it was just, eye opener, the stuff you see, the level of depravity that was going on. I mean, I could tell you stories, where, we had one guy, my detective partner and I arrested on a shooting. It was just the guy he shot just happened to just move in and start renting an apartment where, this big drug dealer had been staying and had moved out. And so these kids, I say kids, are in their 20s, but they didn't realize the drug dealer moved out, and they go in to do a home invasion, and they put the guy down on the floor after he comes back from, watching a Redskins game with his mom on TV and his buddy, and put him down on the floor and hit him in the head with a 38. And luckily, and I interviewed the guy in the hospital, I'll never forget. I mean, afterwards, like, he played dead. It didn't pierce his skull the way they shot it, and it just like skated down his hairline and down his head, and so he had a scar there, like where hair would never grow, but he lived. But I mean, that's the kind of stuff that was going on, and we were kind of in the thick of it, taking cases, not in the federal system, but in DC Superior Court, which is still a federal court, but it's like, DC is a special jurisdiction because it's a nation capital, so your murders, robberies, that kind of stuff happens in Superior Court as opposed to federal court, which is like your big federal crimes. And so that was an interest. So we worked together, we were out together, we built a close bond, Martha, Mike, and I. And Mike was, just to give you a little background, I mean, he salt of the earth, family man, devoted family man, to both of his. I remember, seeing his kids' pictures on his. I could still vision it today, like on his desk back then. Little kids. He was a soccer coach, and he was always, always had like the team soccer photo up on. He coached soccer, and he was really big into it and big into his family's life. And he's kind of really a role model. And I ended up, raised my hand, knew nothing about soccer, but like when my daughter and son, got older or started playing soccer, I started coaching and stuff, and I just thought about Mike, like what a great influence as a person, as a human being, and Martha, I mean, that you couldn't find a kinder person in this world, maybe my wife, right, but I mean, than Martha. I mean, she was just good, infectious, positive attitude, irrespective of how bad things seemed, I mean, just always good. And as a young pup, really, I didn't have any experience, I mean, and they were senior veteran agents at this point. And I'd take their lead, but we would, be teamed up with a detective and go out and make cases. And I remember like one case, just going back to the city, and I'll tell you another anecdotal story. I remember a prosecutor telling a story, like she's interviewing, witnesses for a trial, and these young kids, and I say kids, in their 20s, but gang related drug activity, and she says something like, thou shalt not kill, the 10 in the 10 commandments, and the kids respond, the one witness responds, well, what's that? What's the 10 commandments, right? And I think it was a telling thing that, like, look, the basis of our Judeo-Christian civilization, right? The basis of our legal system, wasn't reaching parts of inner city Washington, D.C. and parts of, probably other big cities in this country, that a kid who's in his early 20s doesn't have any concept that there is a thing, thou shalt not kill, in the 10 commandments, And I remember one guy we arrested, Charlie Beard, and I, who was my detective partner at that time on that major crime and gang task force. When we arrested him, he had a necklace with a 9mm bullet was his necklace. Some people wear a cross or a Star of David or some type of religious symbol. This guy,
St. Michael.
Yeah, this guy's wearing a 9mm bullet is his God, I guess. But I mean, that really, I think that speaks a lot to like how things were, how things are, what the problem is, in our society, and why we have this. You want to look at, root causes. I mean, I think that's where you break down the family. I mean, every one of these guys you arrest through the years, they're single parents or non-existent parent, or even if they have two parents, or parents don't have any role in their life. I mean, and so there's no nurturing. There's no, but I'm not saying. Look, I think we need to focus again. We're not doing it now, but we need to focus on the consequences of crime and not on, the causes, because, it's going to sink the country if we don't get a hold of it again. And this time, I think it's even what's welling up in this country is a lot more dangerous. But again, so I'm on this major crime task force. After about 6 months or so, it dissolves, and they push us all over to, we're on the same squad, same FBI supervisor, but they push us over to the cold case task force, which had been also run. There's two task forces running on C-21, the old C-21 squad at Washington field office. There was a cold case squad, and then there was the major crime task force. Major crime task force kind of goes away for whatever reasons, and then they put us on C-21. And I'm like, hey, I'm 3 years in the bureau. I just hit the lottery. I'm going to get to work with the cold case squad. Was veteran FBI agents with violent crime, knowledge and background and years of work. And a lot of guys from the bank robbery squad came over there, and there was that group. It teamed up with veteran DC homicide detectives from the different districts within DC, and the goal of this was to investigate drug-related homicides of over a year old. And why over a year old? Drug or gang-related homicides over a year old. And the whole thinking of that cold case squad was, one, it's a federal city, so you can have the federal involvement. DC was being overwhelmed with shootings, and one other stat. Let me throw out to you. 90. We'll fast forward to 93, 94. Right? There's broke the record in 90 or 91, I think, when I got out of the academy of 482 homicides. I remember the police chief when they did this inauguration, when we go over to work on C21, the DC police chief, gave a little speech, and he says, there was 2,500 assault with intent to kill or assault with a deadly weapon in DC. And DC had been losing its population up to that because people were moving. If you could afford to get out, you got out of DC, right? And the 2,500 ADWs or AWICs, right? And like he said, but for the fact that there's advances in modern science, or
trauma care,
or the fact,
things like that.
Yeah. Or the bad guys couldn't shoot straight, that would be 2,500 homicides. Think about that number. Add 2,500 homicides on top of, the 482 in 1991, or the 703 in the surrounding metropolitan area, Prince George's County and Montgomery County and the counties surrounding DC. It's just it's a war zone. It was a war zone. There's no way to describe it as anything else. No one felt safe, no matter what part of the city you were in. If you're in a business district, stuff was kicking off everywhere. And that's kind of the backdrop of where we were. So I get on C21 now, and I'm on C21, but I get moved over to this other task force, and it's the cold case homicide thing. And why we did the cold cases is, witnesses, after a year, the thinking was, well, maybe, the person that was the shooter, or maybe the person that would otherwise retaliate against you, is now in jail on some unrelated charge, and you're more likely to talk. The fact that DC homicide detectives, the bodies were stacking up, literally, the bodies were just stacking up one on another. They didn't have time to investigate. You'd pull some of these case files, and there's a couple interviews done, and then they'd have to move on to the other, because they're responding to 3-4 homicides a night during this period, and they're, they're getting pulled all different directions. So, that was the goal, was to go back, identify this most violent, if any of the most violent persons. That was, Holder's idea as a U.S. attorney, get the most violent persons. If they're on this list, go after them. If they were, if they were somebody that was flagged as, if you could take somebody off the street that was responsible for 30 homicides, right? You might not be able to prove 30 homicides, but if you could prove one on them, that's going to reduce crime and be a crime reduction model. And I think that's really what reduced the crime in the city. It was the sentencing guidelines that picking people off any way we could. So, you had Squad C6 doing that Rafe Edmond and doing the enterprise case. You had other squads doing other type of specific gang cases. And then there was us, who were going back on more of a micro level, so to speak, not the macro level of investigating single homicides. And for me, man, I was a sponge. I mean, this was a chance to work with like DC homicide detectives, and these guys literally were like artists painting with a brush. The way they conducted interviews, the way they maintained themselves. I mean, they could get the most hardcore, cold gangbanger, in a room and talk with respect and just, build rapport with them and then, get them, down the line to either make admissions or confess, and the way they got witnesses to talk to them. I mean, it was an amazing experience. And I look back at, my role, the thing I enjoyed the most in the FBI throughout my entire 27 career was doing the subject interview, right? And I would be brought in on other people's cases sometimes, to be the person that, interviews the subject. Because I mean, I developed a good skill at it, and I got a lot of confessions in my career. But I go back to my time, in that short time on the cold case squad, when, I've been to interview and interrogation school and the FBI school and the Reed method and all that stuff, but I mean, I really learned such a lot at a formative time in my early career from these DC homicide detectives. And these guys were legends. I mean, it's just it was there was so many, things that you just got involved in, or you got to sit in unrelated cases, but they would work. They, back they had a videoed up interrogation, interview room, and, one detective would step out and then you'd jump in and you'd keep that flow going. And it was just a great time.
Hey, let me ask a question here real quick too, because there's an interesting jurisdictional question here, because in the federal statutes, I mean, back at that time, there was no federal statute for just like a murder. The FBI had no authority to make arrests and investigate murders, but DC being a special district. So when it came to charging, you'd get somebody on this. Even though you guys would help make the case, did that all get charged through then the DC Metropolitan Police through their court system, or how much of that could you take federal?
Yeah, that was wild. I mean, we papered cases in the DC system. You learned, you did the like PD 123s, I think they were called, their form, like their report of investigation. Everything was recorded, or you you typed it. Like their statements were like, what did you see next? You have to, put it in, and then what their exact answer was. I mean, you did everything on pretty much DC. It was on DC paperwork, and everything went through DC Superior Court. But you testified as a witness, or you would your detective partner would help you paper that case, or you would just jointly put that thing together, the case file, and present it to the U.S. attorney. They were U.S. attorneys in Superior Court, but they were, but they were Superior Court attorneys doing it in the state system.
Can you explain what you mean when you say paper a case?
Yeah, I mean, paper in a case was like instead of like in the federal system, you do a complaint and then an indictment and you do discovery. I mean, DC is a police department, and they have a whole set of separate and different forms that have grown up through their court system and through their department, and basically that's what there's certain things. And I don't recall everything now, but I mean, there's certain, things that you had to do before you presented that to a court and present to the attorneys, to the prosecutor's office to file that charge.
Hey, players, that is the end of part one. Part two, as always, comes out on Thursday. In the meantime, check us out at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook, at the Instagram. But where you got to be, got to be on patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We have a ton of good stuff, including, if you are at the right level, Guardian of the Realm and Warden of the Throne, we have just released part one, episode 1 of The Real DEA Narcos, talking about the real DEA Narcos, Cali edition. Chris Feistel and Dave Mitchell go in depth, 16 hours, about how they took down the Cali cartel. Information you will not hear anywhere else in the world, not on Netflix, not anywhere, not in a book, only right here on Game of Crimes at patreon.com/Game of Crimes. In the meantime, also go check out our webpage, gameofcrimespodcast.com. We've got the latest merch, pictures for every episode that we put up, books that our guests write. We only put up books that they write. We put them up there. So we thank you once again for being a player in the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes.